Welcome. This is Attorney Talib Kareem, the Executive Director for STEM4US, and I am excited to be here this morning for another conversation that we are hosting, particularly this summer, to deal with, what greater problem do we have in our nation, in every city across this country, a country that is supposed to be the most well advanced, the most resourced, the most sophisticated, the most technologically developed country in the world. And yet we have a problem that is sweeping every city and even suburb in our country. And that is a issue of youth violence. Violence that is either being perpetrated by youth or in which youth are the victims. And again, this morning, this conversation really, in terms of how we need to save or engage our youth, particularly over the summer, should have been hosted at the beginning of the year, or at least at the beginning of the summer. But we said that there was, again, no way we could delay this conversation any further. And so we're looking forward to having a robust conversation with you, first and foremost, with you. So we invite you to join us. Leave your comments or questions in the chat so we can engage with you and answer them. Feel free to like and share this conversation, and let us not just have another talk, but let us use this conversation as a jumping off point for some additional engagement, some additional resources being directed to programs that are working, the creation of new programs that need to be put in place to fill the gaps, and for us to wrap our arms around our young people, many of whom are misguided and are hurting themselves and hurting other people. And we need not to be afraid, so afraid of our own personal safety that we don't engage with our young people. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on to you someone who's really an expert in this area, someone who is a person who is steeped in an understanding about the challenges that are facing our young people and what they are dealing with in terms of their educational both challenges as well as where we want them to be long term. He is none other than Dr. Willis Walter, the Dean of the College of Education and a tenured associate professor of teaching and learning at the Virginia State University, that institution high on the hills of the Appomattox, as our president, Dr. Makola Abdullah, likes to say there. He assists in the preparation of professionals that are competent, caring, and culturally responsive in the areas of teacher education, school counseling, health and sports management, and educational leadership. Over the last 5 years, he has led the VSU College of Education, and they have accumulated over $8 million in grants with partnerships that include the Wallace Foundation, the National Math and Science Initiative, Branch Alliance for Teacher Diversity, American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, the Verizon Innovative Learning, the James Madison University Sub-Award for New Teacher Support, and the Virginia Department of Education Clinical Faculty and Teacher Residency. So, and he has a long resume, and so why don't I bring him on so he can kind of, give you a little bit more background on himself. Dr. Willis, welcome. How are you doing, Dr. Willis, first of all?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Talib.
I know, just think about Taliban and just take out the AN. But thank you, Dr. Willis, and you're looking very bright and handsome there. And I see we have a couple of other speakers who have joined this conversation, and I don't have their biographies that is as developed as yours. But we'll go ahead and bring them in on our conversation because we need to have as many people as possible. And again, if you have any questions or comments for our speakers, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we promise to get those recognized. Without any further ado, let's bring on Attorney Bernice Miracle North, all the way from Attorney North. Where are you coming in from this morning?
From my home in Silver Spring.
Silver Spring, Maryland.
Getting ready to start my canvassing day as a candidate. So
excellent. And again, I don't have Attorney North's biography in front of me, but I know her personally, and she is currently running for the state's attorney's position, which is a position which is the highest law enforcement officer in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. It's a place in which I have now called home for the past couple of years. And I'm very grateful to have Attorney North here with us because, again, her office, just so people will know, is the prosecutor's office. So she is the person who would be responsible for, and prayerfully will be responsible for, engaging with people once they get into trouble and making a determination about whether or not to prosecute, whether or not to divert, or not, whether or not the charges don't match with what is actually going on in terms of the facts. And that's one big issue that I want to talk about, specifically related to challenges that take place in the homes. And that's what I really believe, that 90% of what we see happening to our young people, it starts from conflicts in their homes. And I believe the system in which we have set up is totally broken. And that is the reason why we have the type of anarchy and menacing that we have on our streets. So, but we also have another outstanding speaker, and that is Miss Brandy Brooks. And Miss Brooks is also based in Montgomery County, Maryland, and she is an activist, as I understand, and also a candidate for the Montgomery County Council, which is the legislative body here in Montgomery County, which is one of the largest counties in Maryland, supposedly the one of the wealthiest. I don't know exactly its rankings, but of course these lovely ladies can explain and elucidate on that. But one of the things that we do know is that the education, this public education in Montgomery County, is supposedly one of the best. But yet, even still, in one of the counties or the state's most affluent and most sophisticated education-wise jurisdictions, we still have violence in our schools, with one shooting, which a young man was shot, and I'm not sure if he was killed, but he definitely shot in the bathroom, as I understand, by a ghost gun. And again, this is what's happening even in the most affluent parts of our country. So we're glad to have these two speakers on. And so, Dr. Walter, let me just throw out the first question to you, and we'll have all the other candidates or speakers give the perspective that they have, because I do know that they have to leave. So why don't we start with them and then go back to you, Dr. Walter. But the question that I'll just throw out is simple. What do you think that we can do differently? What do you think we can do differently to engage our young people? And for those candidates, if elected, what can people expect for you in new ideas? Are your thoughts about just throwing the key, locking them up and throwing the key away, or do you have some other ways of engaging them, hopefully before they get into trouble, and then rehabilitating them in the case that they do get into trouble? Let's start with you, Attorney North.
Sleep, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to your audience this morning about this issue. My initial thoughts on working with the youth is really starting early, as early as pre-K. Because from my own personal experience, I have a 5-year-old who'll be going to kindergarten in the fall, and I'm seeing the effects of the COVID pandemic and the level of hostility and violence that's occurring among our youth. And if we don't nip it in the bud early on, we're going to have another generational issue with folks prone to violence instead of resolving conflict amicably. So I've wanted to stress more anti-bullying campaigns, especially among the elementary school level, because frankly, science says that brains fully developed by the age of 7. So why aren't we starting earlier to invest in our youth and give them positive tools to handle conflict so they can be the thriving generation that we want them to be for the future? Now, in terms of when they actually do get in trouble, which tends to happen, those moments occur. That's really the result of trauma from the home or other aspects of their lives that they're in this situation. I want to propose a diversion coordinating team in the office so we can determine what community resources are a better fit as opposed to sending a person through the juvenile justice system. I want to start that pretty early on in the process. I don't want to wait until we're in the courtroom to then say, okay, what can we do to find alternative to adjudication or incarceration? There's a way to do that at the early stages of the process that I am proposing the office create. So not only have a diversion coordinating team, but within that team, make sure that we are keeping track of the data of who's getting diverted. Are we successfully diverting them? Is the recidivism rate changing? Things like that need to be analyzed to see if we are actually utilizing our resources well for the office, because really we're reflecting the needs of the public, and that's important to keep account of.
Excellent, excellent. Attorney, so let's definitely get some additional conversations on in terms of the other perspectives. Brandy, can you share your perspective on the what new ideas do you bring to the table for engaging our youth and keeping them safe both this summer and beyond?
Good morning. Thank you, Talib, so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Also, of course, a pleasure to see Bernice. We've been out on the campaign trail together these many months and seen each other at a lot of events, and I'm so thrilled and also hopefully looking forward to having her as my next state's attorney. My name is Brandy Brooks. I'm an organizer and consultant living in Kensington. And a lot of my work is focused on racial equity and social justice, on housing and making sure that affordable housing is available to all community residents, and also on environmental justice and making sure that the systems and structures from our transportation, our food system, our access to recreational resources, that those are also equitable and both the benefits and the burdens that we share in our environment are equitably distributed across Montgomery County. And that's really why I'm running for county council at large in this primary election, is because I want to make sure that we're really addressing some of those root causes that drive the socioeconomic challenges that I think a lot of our students face in schools, the behavioral and often physical health challenges that a lot of our students face in schools. How are we making sure that they and their families, and that families across Montgomery County, have the basics that are secured in order to make sure that we can care for our families, and in order to make sure that we can go out and be successful in work, be successful in school, be successful in the different spheres that we're trying to operate. Because if your housing is insecure, or if you don't have housing, it's incredibly difficult to then show up and perform in school. It's going to cause tremendous stress and trauma, as Attorney Mariko North was saying, that then impacts how people are behaving in school settings. It's going to make it harder even to participate in recreational activities when you don't have that kind of basics, when you're facing food insecurity. And again, you're struggling just to make sure that you are able to get healthy meals during the day. That's going to impact, again, our educational performance. It's going to impact our health and wellness. It's going to impact our, even your ability to go do something, like alternate engagement after school, like sports or something like that. And so we really have to make sure that we are providing affordable housing for all, making sure that our economy is fair, and that it is providing folks with livable wages, providing folks with opportunities to start and grow their own businesses and employ other people, and making sure that they're not experiencing barriers to that just because of their skin color or where they've come from, or a whole bunch of other barriers that people are facing in Montgomery County. Making sure that our home environments and our work environments are safe, whether you're talking about good indoor air quality in your apartment, the absence of lead and mold and other dangers that really cause problems with people's health, or whether you're talking about in our schools, again, making sure that we are providing the funding for the school construction, that where schools are going to be safe and healthy places for our students, as well as making sure that recreational opportunities are available across our county, and not that you see these kind of differentials in access to resources depending on what area of the county that you live in. So those are some of the things that I am really interested in terms of making sure that we can support our young people and their families to truly live thriving lives here in Montgomery County. And I just want to note that, again, like Bernice, I'm about to head out onto the campaign trail this morning to be doing some outreach to voters across Montgomery County. So I won't be able to stay for very long, but I do appreciate the opportunity just to be able to say hello, and to share a little bit more about myself. And I encourage folks to check out our website, brandyformontgomery.com. That's BRANDY, the number 4, Montgomery.com, to see more about our platform, and also to find out ways that you can get engaged even in these final 4 days, in making sure that we turn out the vote and that our people's voices are heard in this election.
Well, that's great. I think we have, I guess, another one of your colleagues, Lori Ann Sells, who is also joining us. We'll bring her into the conversation. And before any of you guys go, I want to give you this challenge. We at STEM4US, again, we don't want to just have another conversation. We are actually working to try to engage at least 150 young people, and we wish we could engage more. And we'd like your help to engage those young people and provide them a quality summer experience that hopefully can lead to year-round mentoring and hopefully placement and great jobs, even as young people, and a continuation of that mentoring throughout their tenure and time as a high school or middle school student even. Would you all be willing to assist us with that? Each student's tuition for the summer program is $400, and that's just what it is. But we'd like to see if we can get as many people on board to sponsor a student as possible. Would each one of you candidates now, hopefully soon to be elected soon, would you be willing to commit to sponsoring at least one student for our summer program? We'll start with you, Attorney North.
Well, I definitely think mentorship is a fantastic opportunity to really deal with keeping communities safer. So I'm definitely open to having the conversation a little bit further as to, of course, how the mentorship program is going to work. But, as I'm hearing you, this also brings a wonderful opportunity to discuss why it's so important to vote for your elected officials. In my mind, I would think, well, let's have a conversation with the county council to see what county support can be used to actually sustain such mentorship opportunities, right? And that's why it's so important to have folks like Lorianne and Brandy and others running for this office to really have a good, real clear, diverse voice in the office, to making sure that we're dealing with issues like improving mentorship. So I'm definitely open to having the conversation, and I hope to have this type of program even expanded to a more fulfilling and one with longevity to it, with the help of the county council as well as the office.
Excellent response. And one thing I'll leave with you as a note that we have been engaging with the Prince George's County state's attorney even before she got elected, and she and I and our team at STEM4US discussed creating a diversion program that would provide an option for young people as well as even parents. And we wanted to focus on two cohorts, both young people as well as parents, who find themselves, facing possible charges, to have the opportunity to have those charges, both diverted and expunged if the charges were at least, submitted And in exchange for them completing a high quality cyber education training program that leads to employment. I hope you will be open also to working with us in that type of program. Can we get your commitment on that?
I mean, it's one of the community options that I talked about in having that diversion coordinating team is having these conversations like you and I are starting to have, but making sure that's in the institution of the state's attorney's office to have these discussions and develop those opportunities to divert.
Excellent, excellent. And Ms. Brooks, how about you? Will you commit to helping us to sponsor at least one student, and hopefully, getting the county council to fund programs? How can we talk about funding the police? At the huge budgets that we give for them, and not provide, particularly over the summer, programs to engage our young people. The young people don't have. There's no school. There's no. Again, there's nothing to engage our young people. As a default, like public schools is with respect to during the fall and the spring. Should we not, provide the same type of funding to make sure that every young people has a constructive thing to do during the summer, like we do in the fall and spring, particularly, like the program that we offer, Ms. Brooks?
Yeah, so I think, echoing what Attorney Mareko North has said, I think this is a critical opportunity for us to be able to shift the way that we look at our resources and make sure that we're doing so much more to support our young people before they get engaged in opportunities that are dangerous, before they get engaged in situations that are going to be harmful to them and other members of our community. We absolutely have to be investing not just in activities for our young people, but also in the kind of supports around mental health and wellness, around physical health and wellness, those kinds of wraparound supports that make sure that our young people are well taken care of as whole human beings, that they have that connectivity to their community, to other people, to be able to deal with the stresses and pressures that they are also experiencing too, in the same way that all of us are experiencing so much stress and pressure during this time. And so I think it's really critical and something that I'm very interested in, should I be able to join the Montgomery County Council, to really take a hard look at how we can be investing in programs that are providing the kinds of opportunities for our young people that encourage them, in that well-being, physically, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, all of that, and really making sure that we are creating good spaces for them where they feel that they are supported to grow and thrive. And so I think, I'd be very interested in learning more about STEM4US, because I know, there are so many of these different kinds of programs, and we actually need that kind of diversity in programming, because we have a lot of young people. We have a county of over 1 million folks in Montgomery County, and we want to make sure that we're supporting as many different ways in our community, that we are able to provide that support for our students, that we are able to provide that kind of access to resources for our communities. And I'm going to apologize because I do actually have to hop off and head out. I see that Bernice is already out in her car, and I need to get to do the same. But it has been a pleasure to be able to be here, and thank you so much just for the opportunity to introduce myself and to share a little bit more with you all this morning.
Excellent. And so your colleague, who's also running as at large on the Montgomery County Council, attorney. Are you an attorney, Lori, or not an attorney? But perhaps you can give us your background, but engaged community activist and leader, Lori Ann Sells. Can you give us a little bit of background about yourself, Lori Ann, and provide the response to the question that was provided to the others, and that is, what do you think we need to be doing new to engage our young people and keep them out of harm? We mentioned a couple of points that I would like to have you maybe think about, and that is during the fall and spring, our youth of Montgomery County in particular have a default, and that's school to occupy the time while their parents are away at work. However, during the summer, there's no such, opportunity. And so it's not, by accident apparently, or it's not by surprise that these young people who don't have anything to do find themselves in harm's way. Um, and in fact, I would like, before you make that statement, I want to apologize, for throwing out with asking maybe to ponder on it first. Let us get Dr. Walter. He's been waiting patiently, and I'd love to have him engaged in on this because he has a pedigree of education at the Virginia State University. And I'm sure he's working on these issues on a daily basis. But again, from a structural standpoint, Dr. Walter, as you know, the idea of summer breaks were developed when our country had a more agrarian, kind of tradition, and where children were needed on the farms. And I personally think that it would be great to actually have more children on farms. Maybe that's what we should do during the summer. Send all the children down to farms, for the summer, and give them some opportunity to do some hard labor. I almost guarantee you, if we did that, I bet you that would, really,
That would change some behaviors, that's for sure.
change the behaviors. But Dr. Walter, can you give us your perspective on what we need to do? And perhaps that's one of the big programs we absolutely need to bring up, an agrarian summer break, if you will.
Well, I think first of all, North and Brooks made some great points. The first thing we have to do is do something differently for early childhood education and getting students engaged early, so that they understand the process and what we're trying to get across to them. And that is something that is a year-round endeavor. And my 30 years of experience, both as a K through 12 teacher, as a former principal, and now the last 20 or so years in higher education, I will tell you that our curriculum that is based on industrial age model does not necessarily work and does not engage our kids in the way that it needs to. It does not prepare them for the jobs of the future. And so I think, in addition to us completely modifying the curriculum to get students more prepared for the jobs of the future as opposed to jobs that are past tense, we need to also connect with universities and higher education, so that there is a continuum of learning that really starts in pre-K and goes all the way through to year 16, whereby the student is fully prepared for the different jobs that we know are going to be available for them, especially in the tech industries and in the areas of mathematics and science and engineering. And so hopefully, those would be the three things that I would really look at changing: preschool, and us better preparing students for kindergarten and making sure that they could read before they leave preschool, and then looking at changing the curriculum in K through 12 to be better suited for the jobs of the future, and then third, connecting better with our higher education facilities and industries, so that K through 12 can be as successful as it possibly could be.
Excellent. I think that those are good perspectives. Lorianne, I don't know if you're able to join us back, but we'd love to get her perspective. But let me ask you, Dr. Walter, in the context of what we see in the context of this systematic, I believe, failure, dysfunctionality in this nation, where we have a K through 12 program to engage with young people during the summer and fall. I'm sorry, during the fall and spring, but a lack of engagement during the summer. And again, it just so happens that is when the violence involving young people spikes. Should we not, as a nation, make a commitment to solving that right now. I mean, we have just sent out, as I understand, a defense budget that is somewhere in the neighborhood of $800 billion. 36 billion is going to Ukraine, where they're spending money on weapons that are being basically, sent off all around the world because there's no real functioning state in Ukraine, for example. But we can't spend, and I dare say, I'm almost confident that $36 billion will probably be what we need to fund summer programming. For every young person. I know in Maryland, but I would dare say that probably could count for the rest of the country. But from a structural standpoint,
let me first just say, because I know time is running quickly, I would say I totally agree with you. I don't necessarily think that K through 12 needs to expand exactly what it does during the fall and spring into the summer, but there should be summer options for students that is free of charge, whereby students could actually be engaged in programming that will get them ready for the jobs of the future. What we don't do enough of is take the time in the summer to actually retool or help those students either catch up or make sure that they are getting ahead if they are so inclined. And so for me, it would be to give multiple options of opportunities in working with both higher education and businesses, whereas those students could stay engaged, continue to learn, but also get some on the job training in some kind of ways, especially in middle school and high school.
Very good points. Lorianne, what are your thoughts about that in terms of what that option? Because again, I agree that perhaps making it optional during the summer, because we do need time not only for students to retool, but also for the schools, the infrastructure themselves, to go through some retooling. Although there's another argument to say, well, hey, if our jails are operating 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, they're maintained. Are you saying that our schools can't be done, can't operate the same? And perhaps if they did, we would have less need for jails. But, I think maybe there could be some variety, as you said, during the summer. But Miss Sales, Lorianne, can you give us a perspective and give us a little bit of background about yourself, because some people might not know your background, like we had a bio somewhat on Attorney North and other speakers.
All right. Well, my name is Lorianne Sales. I was originally born in Prince George's County, but now call Montgomery County home. Graduated from Laurel High School. My parents both were Jamaican and were putting a very big emphasis on pursuing our education, completing our degrees. And so even though I became a single mother during my high school career, I was able to complete my education when I moved to Montgomery County because of the great amenities that our county has with regards to affordable housing, some of the best schools in the system. And so when I completed my degree, my master's in public policy from the University of Baltimore, my bachelor's in public health from the University of Maryland, College Park, I knew immediately that I wanted to get involved in local politics. My daughter was the only African-American child in her third grade classroom at Lux Manor Elementary School when we moved here in 2007. So I became very active in the NAACP Parent Council, the PTA, and learned that the elected officials that we sent to Annapolis were the people who were asking for resources to bring back to Montgomery County. And in 2007, they had never elected a Black woman to the Maryland General Assembly. So when I graduated with my master's in 2013, after serving as the vice president of the Montgomery County Young Democrats and working on other campaigns, I decided to launch my own campaign for state delegate. Although my campaign was unsuccessful, I was very excited about the opportunity to play a role in shaping public policy in our community. It was after graduation that I moved to the city of Gaithersburg, one of the largest municipalities in Montgomery County. It's the most diverse city in the country. We carry zero debt. And I'm really glad to be here because we're also known as the biotech corridor of the region. I know how important a STEM education is for our students now because of the emphasis on technology and computing and science, of course, as we are in the midst of the greatest pandemic of our lifetime. And so, as I am looking towards the future and thinking about where I can make the most impact, given my background, having spent the last 4 years, as I mentioned, in the most diverse city in our country, the fastest growing in our county, we were ground zero during the pandemic. We had the highest rates of disparities, the highest cases, and we did not have a testing center or a vaccination clinic nearby. So working with our state, county, and federal partners to stand up resources from Pampers, formula, food distributions on the east and west corridors of our city were key. And so as I had to think about my next decision, should I run for reelection last year in November? Or do I want to look towards how I can make a better impact, a greater impact on our community across the county? An opportunity arose with the term limits. 3 of our seasoned council members will not be seeking reelection. We also have 2 additional council seats up county because of our tremendous growth. And so because of that growth, the loss of a lot of institutional knowledge at the county level, it's important to have trusted, tested, experienced leadership. I'm one of the only candidates that has a background in public health during a national pandemic. The county council sits as the board of health. I'm also one of the only candidates from the Up County region, the fastest growing parts of our county, some of the most diverse parts of our county as well. And we have a lot of unmet needs from parts of our community where residents don't have access to a hospital within 5 miles of their home. We don't have resources, as you're talking about, for out of school time. In the city of Gaithersburg, because we have been so fiscally responsible with attracting the right mix of businesses, we have a surplus of funds. We spend about $1 million in supporting our nonprofits across the city that serve our students K through 12. So out of school time is very important to us. We have our Education Enrichment Committee, and we also have our Community Services Committee. And we spend about $250,000 out of each committee. We have residents that come in and evaluate the applications from our educators, our after school programs that are helping our students, whether it's helping them through citizenship classes, robotics, helping them prepare a resume, getting through internship opportunities, even getting Chromebooks or books. Some of the asks are so simple and some of them can be even more complex. And so my role as a government and elected official would be to ensure that our students have the resources they need to succeed. Being in a county of plenty, there are plenty of resources for our residents, but not everyone has the resources to access those residents, the resources to navigate to get to the resources that are so plentiful in this county. And so I want to ensure that we break down those silos, break down the barriers, and provide those resources at a more convenient time for parents to plan out what they're going to do for the summer. Summer starts in July, but those Summer camps start filling up as soon as students come back from winter break in July. And having a child that's gone through Montgomery County's K through 12 system, who recently graduated from college, I understand the importance of those after school programs, especially as a single mom, making sure that I'm doing the research to ensure that she has enriching opportunities that are going to not only build up her character, her resilience, her leadership qualities, and her connection and commitment to her community. And so my daughter went through programs like Girls Who Code and um, Leadership Montgomery, Leadership Maryland. And so I went to all of those summer fairs and after school fairs. When I was young, and I'm a child of, well, I have 5 siblings. My mother and father, they were middle class, trying to ensure that we had things to do. I remember they had summer playgrounds where you could drop your kids at the nearest playground community center. They still have those opportunities available. And you could go to, a swimming, you could go to the museum. And so I will ensure that our kids have things to do, whether it's a job or an enriching activity. And they are already piloting year-round education, because after the 2 years that we've had, that our kids have experienced, that our educators have experienced emotionally, mentally, physically, with isolation and not being engaged, we're going to have more than enough resources to ensure that that learning loss is addressed, and that our students are spending more times improving their long-term success rather than making rash decisions that will affect them for the long term. So I hope that answers your questions, shares a little bit.
It did. It did. I think you definitely gave a little bit of a different take on it, and I appreciate that take that you've given on that, because you went, kind of gave a really expansive perspective. But in terms of the particularly the violence that we had one question here, particularly violence that is sweeping our schools. What in the way of unique ideas? Because I think from a structural standpoint, we all agree that the summer is let's say the missing link for sure. That there's not again a systemic structural that we have in place in our country that is meeting the need of today. Meaning to say the summer break that we have is structurally deficient and it's not serving the needs of our children. So we understand that, and that has to be changed. But in the context, particularly of the more granular issue, and maybe it's all wrapped in one, but new ways of keeping our young people from harming themselves. What are thoughts that you have on that in particular? And I'll share with you something that has been stated already. Okay. One of the things that we have seen is an incident in which particularly youth in homes where parents are engaged, that there's conflict in homes. And quite frankly, as you know, it's a person who was married at one point, there's conflict in every home. I can tell you as a person who's been married multiple times, there's not, marriage is built on conflict. It's built on engaging in conflict and then going through that conflict and then repeating that period, getting through it, going through more conflict, getting through it. And every time you get through it, your marriage actually has a stronger foundation. But that said, some conflict exists. It creates such a tension that sometimes police are called. And then in that context, particularly as a lawyer, the system itself right now is structured that when police are called, almost invariably, that is going to lead to a almost 85% of the time an eviction of the man in the home, no matter what happened. Generally, because of the system's over emphasis on making sure that there's again no physical violence that is claiming the lives of anybody. It ultimately, 85% of the time, from the anecdotal data that we have, leads to the eviction of the man from the home, the father of the children. That ultimately, what happens because of the structure right now of our system, has again, the orders have in some jurisdictions 3 years. So it's a 3-year stay away order in which the father cannot come back to the home, and in fact, the mother and father can't even talk. They have a stay away in which in some cases that they can't even communicate outside through a third party. From a concept of raising a child, co-parenting even, let alone being able to do other things such as paying bills and other things, that creates in some ways the kind of fertilizer for this type of juvenile delinquency. And sadly, the data also suggests that a significant number of children who go through these what they call civil protective order proceedings, a significant percentage, perhaps as many as 85 as well, find themselves graduating from those proceedings into the juvenile justice system, and from there going to the criminal justice system. So, as a background on that, and maybe attacking that as a particular problem, but and we'll start with Dr. Walter. What new
Well, I'm
ideas?
sorry, Talib, I actually have to go.
Okay, we'll start with you, Lorianne. So, with your idea, what new ideas might you bring to the table for tackling violence? Be it addressing and reforming the parenting conflicts that go on, and how we're engaging with those, or other structural problems that we can change to eliminate the violence that's taking place on our streets, that some people again tie to what's happening within our homes.
Well, I think that we're in a really unique position right now because this is the first time in my lifetime that mental health has been talked about so widely, and it's become very mainstream. And because of technology, it's become even more accessible. And so, integrating telehealth medicine into our school system to ensure that students always have a professional adult to speak with. They understand how to, decompress and de-escalate situations. They know how to process their emotions in a more mature and healthy way. Mindfulness activities, meditation, yoga. I mean, these are the things that are not new, but need to be integrated into our school system and into our students' daily activities so that they can better manage their stress levels. Back in the day, I got into a bit of a bit of trouble in school. I was a fighter in school, and so I know that kids who are exposed to violence will, model those behaviors. And so they used to force you to bring your parents to school instead of suspending you. Your parents had to walk with you to all the schools. It was embarrassing, but you didn't miss any time out of school. And so I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel and come up with any new things. We need to go back to what works. Peer mediators, teaching our kids how to, be healthy and how to resolve conflict with their peers is also a good model for our students to have. And so I look forward to working with you and learning more about the programs that you have in mind and bringing the resources of the government to bear to ensure that all of our students are able to excel. And looking forward to everyone getting out and voting or returning their ballots before July 19th. And so thank you again for the opportunity. And I look forward to joining you all again very soon.
Well, thank you, Lorianne. We really appreciate your perspective, particularly coming all the way from Gaithersburg. And one of the things, I mean, again, there's some great resources in Gaithersburg. Like they have some great camping facilities that I think that our young people need to be able to take more advantage of. They also have in Gaithersburg an airport that, again, is a perfect place for our young people to learn and be engaged by. And again, Dr. Walter, from a structural standpoint, these are, it seems like there's been some great ideas that were discussed. So, let me ask you about that one point.
But Tyler, the one thing that I would say is that as Lorianne was just saying, many of these ideas aren't new. They are proven, research based um, items that we have been talking about for years, but not yet implementing in our schools and or in some of the other places in which our students have opportunities. We at Virginia State have mental health days, in which we had, I think, 5 or 6 mental health days last year to make sure that students had a chance to kind of retool and regroup, if you would, prior to um, uh, um, having to deal with the challenges of the end of the semester or the midterm experience that many of them are having for the first time. We had mindfulness activities going on all throughout the year, and we really have to do away with this zero tolerance. We have to expect our students to make some mistakes, but make sure that they don't have these as patterns. And the one way you do that is use those mistakes as teaching tools and making sure that they learn from that experience and they don't repeat it. And you do that by loving them through the experience as opposed to hating on them and saying that we're going to kick you out of a program or kick you into a rehab place and throw away the key. And so for me, it's us actually knowing what works isn't enough anymore. We really have to start doing and living by some of these things that we found to be successful.
I was just going to ask you about that. Particularly, I was going to ask you about this issue that Lori touched on in terms of the discipline in the schools. And again, as the dean of the college education there at Virginia State University, one of the things I know as someone who, like Lorianne, I used to get suspended a lot when I was in school, oftentimes for fighting. And one of the reasons why I got suspended for fighting was because I was Muslim. And growing up as a Muslim child in the urban community in which I lived in Detroit, Michigan, particularly the Highland Park schools and the Detroit public schools, was a challenge. Even though that community is rich with a number of Muslims and people from the Middle East, even back then, more so I think now. There was a lot of discrimination, and bias and bigotry, that we experience at the hands of other children. You know what I mean? Generally ignorance, but of course, with bias and bigotry is all based on ignorance. But that's what happened, and so as a result, it caused a lot of tension and fighting and suspensions. But one of the things that I also remember is being paddled in schools. Before the suspensions, I maybe several times getting paddled, then a suspension. But it was the first response wasn't suspension or now calling the police on children. But because there was that option, that tool of physical engagement, which worked for me, and I believe it definitely worked for all thousands of other, perhaps millions of other children who experienced that form of discipline And so my question to you from a historical standpoint is, when did that type of discipline end in our schools? What around what year did it end, and what have we seen in terms of the data since that time? And don't you think, perhaps based on what we see now versus then, that we need to return, as you say, to programs that work?
So, having been a principal during an era in which I did paddle students, let me say, um, that turn, I think, for the most part, happened around the late 1990s, early 2000, for most of our school divisions. Um, but even then, you had to really depend on the individual that was doing the paddling. You had to deal with the teacher that was recommending that student to the principal's office. Um, a- and I would say the root cause of many students going to the principal's office, including your situation, is that you did not have teachers that fully understood other cultures and other situations. Whereas a good teacher would have been able to recognize that you, in some sense, were being bullied and were being teased or mocked because of your religion, and that was not right. We need teachers that have wickedness and that understand different cultures. And so, one of the things that we do in the College of Education is to really focus on. Um, Teaching students that they have to know their own biases and their own self and what trauma has led them to the teaching profession. Because I often say, hurt people hurt people. And so for us, I think it really comes down to the teacher in the classroom being an advocate for children and using culturally responsive pedagogy to making sure that they bridge the gap between their own culture, the other students in the classroom culture, and those other minority students that are in the classroom as well. And so for me, even though some would say paddling was a best practice because we had limited violence or outburst at that time, I think we're totally in a different um, paradigm as it relates to how students are developing and what they have access to with the computers and with their cell phones. And because of that, we have a different population that we're serving. And so we have to love on these students a little bit differently than the way our parents loved on us and some of our teachers loved on us back in the day.
And I really appreciate this dialogue because I understand that your perspective that you have now is the default. But my question is in terms of what does the data say? And I am so again, and perhaps that's something that your institution needs to be the leader in studying, Dr. Walter, because I don't think that I haven't seen a study on that. I suspect that if there was such a study, we might find that the data suggests that the rise in violence in our community could be directly tied to the precipitous drop in discipline in the schools, because sadly, the schools were in many cases were the default mechanism of discipline. I know a lot of the children who I was raised with, and I didn't know what was going on in their homes until after graduation. And I remember going to a program in which some of my classmates came back to talk to the students, 20 years after we graduated, and they were sharing what was happening in their homes while they were students. And I was just kind of shocked. I was like, wow, I didn't even know, you know what I mean? That some of these students, their homes, one student was, one of my colleagues was talking about how somebody had actually come in his house and shot up, was shooting at one of his parents and shot up the house and he was a child in the house. at that time.
Yes.
You know, again, this is somebody who I was going to school with, playing around with it. And I didn't even know that this was the type of trauma that this person was experiencing. Another person told me about how, they were the victim of, sexual abuse, you know what I mean? Inside the house. Another person was telling me how their parents were, basically on drugs. And so they were not in the house while they were, going to school every day. You know what I mean? And so and that was the experience then. I can almost imagine now it's even worse. And you don't, without that type of parenting, and that's really what it is. The discipline that the schools were providing back then was a supplement to the parenting, right? That was, again, even then, talking about 35, 40 years ago, was challenged. Now, it seems to me that it's exacerbated. You know what I mean? That the problem then of parenting and the lack of parenting was a problem. Now it seems to be even worse. What in terms of, again, substituting for that parenting, what do you think the data might say? Again, in terms of
Tyler, the data is very clear that over that time period, we have grown in violence in both the schools, but also externally in our communities. However, I think many would say that there are lots of other variables, like what you've also mentioned. And just imagine, and when I was a principal, I had a child that was acting out, um, uh, of which I paddled, but understanding sometimes you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what has happened in that particular home, and when you can't get parents to respond as a principal would like them to, we can't necessarily move to the typical order of discipline, um, without first finding out what really is occurring in that home. And so many times that is a difficult situation for many of our principals as well as teachers. Um, but I've had a child that um, went to bed and stayed in the bed with their dead parent. I was holding that parent's hand when the family came and found them the next day when the child didn't go to school. Um, you've had children that have been molested, and they act out in the bathroom, and we want to throw the book at the child, not knowing that the child has learned that behavior from somewhere. So you have to be real careful about the levels of discipline that we have, as well as when you start talking about disciplining in a manner in which we are causing physical touch to students. What message that sends also to them as to how they can solve problems. And so I would not necessarily say discipline in the past was a best practice, but I do think there are some things that we can do differently that would get our point across better to our young people, to help them understand that they can't continue to make these same mistakes or escalate these mistakes into bigger mistakes, um, without there being a consequence that they will ultimately be affected by.
Well, we have a good question here. Um, Christina Trinity, how are you, Christine? She says, I hear you speaking about schools and teachers, which are paramount in the lives of our children. How can we reach out to parents and guardians? It seems to me what she's also alluding to something that my mother used to focus on, and that is parenting classes. She had a school that she ran, and not only was she teaching the children, particularly this is at the beginning of the digital era, in which computing was just coming on the scene. It's a long time before we had literally more advanced computers in our pockets in terms of iPhones. But you know, she was teaching parents how to be parents. Um, do you think that perhaps in addition to what we're doing for the children, that we need to again revolutionize the whole idea of um, education of the family? You know, not just educating the children, but educating the entire family, and starting with the parents, like right at the beginning when you enroll your student, let's say in pre-K or in in daycare, beginning the process of training the parents on how to be parents. Doc, can you deliver?
Well, we have a license for everything else, don't we? You
Yes, sir.
got need a license for a gun. You need a license for a car. You need a license for everything except for probably the most important thing that we have, which is the raising of our children. And yes, it needs to start in preschool, and that's why I said that preschool component is so important. That we need to uh, make mandatory certain lessons and certain activities for parents. Many parents are acting out in a way that's not congruent with best practice because they are just repeating what they were exposed to growing up, not understanding that that wasn't necessarily the best possible solution to solving their children's problem, or in the case of them being raised in solving their problem. And so for me, it's really about us engaging with the parents early in the matriculation of the student's life and teaching them how to be a good parent. And what that means is helping them understand once that child gets home that you have to continue the lessons taught from school. And that is not necessarily intuitive for all of our parents and everybody, especially for our parents that are working 2 and 3 jobs. They're trying to just do their very best at keeping food on the table. Over the pandemic, we've also seen, you know, a lot of parents who've had their own mental health issues, then pass those bad behaviors on to their children. And so, um, us connecting with them early and making sure that they understand what the school is responsible for, and then also what the parent is responsible for, and how we can be good partners in the raising of our young people so that all students can be as successful, not only academically, but also behavior wise.
Doc, you hit on a good point, and there's another question that Christine has in terms of what community can do and how community members can be engaged. But I want to, before you answer that, go back to this issue of parenting, and I see something that is happening, and I don't hear anybody calling it out. And this is going on where a parent is spending so much time like on social media, you know, watching TikTok, for example, or Instagram, posting pictures of herself or himself, um, um, or and then you know, going, let's say, spending the whole night out partying, you know, or drinking, and then coming back into the home and expecting their child to, you know, be normal and not, you know, basically have any problems. Does that even make sense? And what do we need to do to get to these parents, you know, and let them know that their children are directly, you know, responding to what they see, the lack of stability, the lack of, you know, consistency, the lack of self-discipline. Like, you know, we're telling our children that they need to be disciplined, that they need to be honest, that they need to be trustworthy, and yet their parents aren't being honest. They're not being trustworthy. They're not exhibiting, you know, maturity that we want our children to exhibit. Doc, what can you speak to with respect to that?
Well, I think each of those situations are different, but I think the one thing that you are really touching on is that number one, we don't really have community anymore. The community has changed because of social media. Our kids are being raised by, um, uh, for a better term, people that don't know them, that don't know their home, don't know their upbringing, don't know what values you have set or were trying to set for your children. And so you have competing media out there for the raising of our kids. And because of that, it really makes it difficult for a parent to be successful in passing on their values. Um, I would hope that as we grow in the use of media, that we are able to use it a little bit more responsibly, as well as that our parents understand that they are caught on tape, that they are um, constantly role models for our children, rather they think their children see them or not. The children are extrapolating from the behaviors that they are displaying, and associating those with some of the behaviors they see in social media. And then they take those cues and run with them. And so I think we have to do a better job of talking to our students, our children early on. We have to be good role models for our children and making sure that they know what we value. And then we have to also introduce them to the community that we want them to be a part of. And sometimes that means limiting what all they are seeing and are what is approved for them to view on social media.
Well, I Doc, you said a boatload in terms of the social media that our children are exposed to, not to mention the social media that their parents are are consuming, and the children are hearing. Like, again, going back to this TikTok, the parent, mom, or whoever might be in the household listening to some TikTok, which can be outrageous, and then the children are in earshot of this nonsense, and again, the parents not expecting that the children are going to listen to that, and hear this type of thing, talking about sexual acts being performed, or talking about violence being taken, or just foolishness, and that the children are not going to want to know, or try, or I mean, it's just, what are we thinking, Doc? I mean, what literally are we as parents, what are we thinking to not
What
assume that our children are being affected by the social media that we are consuming?
Well, Tyler, two things. Now, I grew up in Chicago to a single mom. But my mother was very clear. There are certain things that you do in the house and or listen to or can listen to in the house, and then there's other things that you can share and or listen to publicly, right? And for this community, for this um, country now, for our country now, um, our students don't hear that anymore. Everything is public consumption. Everything is for public distribution. Everything is not only done in the house, but they'll do that on the street. They'll do that in the parking lot. They'll do that in the mall. Um, and when you don't have those kinds of social cues as to what is and is not acceptable in different places, then those lines are blurred all across our community, all over our social sphere. And that's why we have some of the behaviors and some of the acting out that I think we've seen over the last few years. Now, in saying that, schools cannot solve all of that parents by themselves can't solve all that. It really has to come down to some of our public officials and who we elect, but also it comes down to the community in which we introduce our kids to, and those different organizations that we belong to that hopefully provide ample opportunities for students for children to be children, but also teach them the behaviors we want them to grow in. And so the organizations we belong to are just as important, I think, now as they were some 10, 15, 20 years ago, if not more so. And I don't think our parents and or the community is really acting as such. But different fraternities and sororities and the programming that they put on is, I think, important to helping raise our children. The STEAM program that you're doing is important for teaching our kids the kind of values and the kind of things that we want them to be not only interested in, but that they will later give back to in order for continued success. And we have to teach that at an early age.
You know, I really agree with you wholeheartedly about, again, teaching our young people at an early age. And in terms of that, and I think that that question, that point connects to that comment that was asked in terms of the way community can engage with our young people, having these programs that the organizations are sponsoring. And that goes back to funding oftentimes. And that's the reason we're having this conversation, you know, and having those people who are running for office make those commitments now is important because, you know, they are going to be over budgets, in some cases, billion-dollar budgets. And, you know, the question is how much do you allocate for, you know, youth engagement? And again, think about it. If you can allocate and invest in the young people now, they don't become problems for you down the road. You know, a dollar you invest, you know, they say a dollar invested in youth engagement now saves you, I think they say $1,000 in terms of incarceration or problems that are related to that, and also comes back to you in terms of tax revenue. If think about it, if you're investing in our young people, encouraging them to be, you know, again, productive members of our community, and as we said, I think that this has to be brought into it, investing in their parents, right? Training their parents as well to be responsible, you know, to be active, to be thoughtful and deliberate, then we are likely to get better outcomes down the road. And so I think that this is what could be an answer to how can the community be involved. Do you have any other things to comment on that particular?
Well, the only thing I would say add to it is that we got to stop thinking of in a capitalistic um, idea or a paradigm in which we are only talking about our kids getting rich. That getting rich could be them being a civil servant and doing service for their community.
Right.
We have to do more. We have to recruit more teachers that look like the community. We have to look at more medical personnel that look like the community in order to really address some of the community ills in some of the more constructive ways of making sure that our community continues to grow and prosper. And that isn't always done with just finances, but what it does do is put individuals in the right position in order to still give back to their community and also solicit funds from those that have the wherewithal and money to do so.
Very good point. Very good point. We have another question here. There's some good questions coming in. Christine also says some school counselors appear to be overwhelmed. And this is a very good point. You don't have time to listen or advocate to our students? How can school counselors be trained to advocate and apply the knowledge they've acquired? And I would add to her question, is this not also an issue of funding? In some cases, you have one counselor. With my school, high school, we had 1,000 students in the high school, and we had 4 counselors. So that meant one counselor to every 250 students. 250 students. Now, I understand you have an average, or you only have one counselor in the school. So instead of having 1 to 250, you have 1 to 1,000. You know what I mean? Imagine 1 to 1,000. Literally, there's no way you can meet with every student. In a year, if you have, like, let's say out of a school, how many days do you have in the school?
180.
180 days. 180 days. You have 1,000 students to meet with them in 180 days. That means you have to meet with like about almost 10 students per day. How does, 10 students per day in 1 year? That means you're only going to be able to meet with them probably once in a whole year. How do you do that with that? And do we need, again, talk about reallocation of budgets, put more money into that?
Caleb, that's a problem policy wise, right? For a school division to have as a policy that is the ratio, and in many cases, those policies are dictated by the state. And so that's why I say you're electing officials that have a say so at the state level, so that it can change those kinds of policies is just as important as you having the right boots on the ground. Um, we have about 65 students in our counseling program. Um, all of those counselors for K through 12 school counseling will be hired before their internship is done. Why is that? Because there's such a need for counselors. But our state has also added to the number of counselors each school is required to have. Because I know my daughter, that was in a school of over 1,500 students, that when she wanted to get counseling on what college to go to, um, people did not have the time and opportunity to really spend with them, with her. In order to do that, they were more concerned about test preparation and things of that nature to get out for the coming year, than it was to really advise and counsel student in career opportunities and what might be ailing, or what needs a particular student has. And so we have to grow the number of counselors in our schools, but a lot of times that is limited by policy, either by the school system or by the state. And so we need to really change that, especially post pandemic, because we know more kids as well as teachers are struggling with their mental health and the questions about how they move forward. And many times a counselor can help one through those discussions better than a classroom teacher or administrator.
Very good points. Wow. I just, again, man, we're just dissecting this problem, and every kind of question, reveals another layer of the problem, and that we see that this is structural. It's almost kind of like some people would look at it from an engineering standpoint, almost saying like these problems. There's so many problems, almost kind of a guarantee for the outcomes that we're getting. It's almost kind of impossible not to get the violence that we're having in our community with so many of these structural problems.
And just to be clear, Christine, counselors are trained to deal with these problems and advocate for children. However, they don't have the time, and in some cases, don't have the ability to do so because of the other things that are going on in the school. And unless you grow the number of counselors, you're going to continue to run into that problem.
So another issue that goes back to the parenting that we'd like to have you speak on is what Lisa has spoken to, and that is again the ideas of how what happens between the mother and father should not be communicated outside of the home. um, you know uh, and maybe again this goes back to parenting, and she mentions this. um, you know Engaging, what would a parenting program, because we talked about, we acknowledge there's a structural deficiency in terms of training our parents, right? As a program at the University of Virginia State University, can you tell me what would a parenting program look like, um, to complement what we're doing with children, let's say for 6 hours a day? What would a parenting program look like? And then second of all, should school just be limited to 6 hours when parents are at work 8 hours and sometimes 9 hours a day? So let's deal with both those separate, because I think those are separate questions. What would a successful parenting complementary program that goes hand in hand with schooling for children? What would, again, schooling for parents, if you will,
Well, first of all, let me answer the latter question first. Um, when I was a principal in Birmingham, we had a community school, which that opened up early and took on students that needed to be dropped off early, fed them, made sure they were prepared for the school day, and there was a great communication between the school and the parents. Um, uh, Also, after school programs was essential for us, and as a community school, whereas those students could stay, get their lessons done, and then eventually play with other kids in a social community that was monitored by professionals that made sure that the students' behaviors were consistent with those that the school was trying to produce in all of our students. And again, the communication with the parents was paramount in that relationship, because they needed to know what we were seeing, as well as we needed to know what they needed help in. Developing their young people or their child in that area. Now, when I say there are parent counselors, as well as church counselors, counselors in each of the fields that we're talking about, that have different curriculums in which they expose and or talk through parent issues and or family issues. um, and it really depends. There are so many different issues that come up for conversation as it relates to parenting. You really need to know where the parent is having the most problems, or in a dynamic between a husband and his wife, where they're having problems. But I will say that one of the most important areas that any program needs to have is that it is communication and relationship building. We don't do enough of it in K through 12, of helping students understand how other people feel, and therefore how we can make them feel better, and or how we can partner with others in a relationship together and grow together, as opposed to I'm going to do me and you do you. um, we have to, I think, work on also, in addition to communicating and building greater relationships, we have to look at what our goals are as a family or as a community. The one thing that a lot of students get distracted by are all the different things in social media, because they don't have a vantage point of knowing what their goal is, a long-term goal, of success for them and or their family. And so understanding those things, I think, really brings a little bit more clarity to the student as well as to the adults in the relationships. Hopefully that answered your question. Um, because I do think that those are the important issues of today, because our community has changed so much. We used to have a very solid community in which everybody knew each other, they trusted one another. Now we know a whole bunch of folks, but we trust none. And because of that lack of trust, we will do some things against one another, and or that's not in both parties' best interests, because there's really no trust there.
Brother, Doc, you are just laying it out, man. I mean, honestly, I would say they need to, replace the person whoever's running the Department of Education with you. I mean, and this is, I think that there's also another issue I'm gonna bring to the table, and I personally believe that also what's happening in our schools is, you mentioned trust, right? I believe that what's happening is also, the trust has been broken because you have an agenda of certain people who have a certain way of lifestyle that they're living, that they want everybody else to adopt, and so there's a rebellion going on. It's a rebellion happening with respect to the children who are hearing these things like, okay, it's okay to be whoever you want to be. You can be a boy if you're a girl, or you can be a girl if you're a boy. I mean, and again, I'm no psychological, expert, but just from, what I understand of just basic psychology 101, what I remember, my psychology class is that's schizophrenia. If I say it's night and it's day, and again, I know it's day, but I say it's night, and everybody else objectively knows it's night, but I'm saying it's day, then that is a diagnosed medical condition, mental health condition that I have that needs to be treated as such. However, if we now have a paradigm that says it's okay for you to believe that it's night when it's absolutely day, it seems to me that is again leading to some of the mental health issues that we are exhibiting, and no one is wanting to talk about that, and it seems to me that we can't escape that conversation, when you have a breakdown in moral values, right? When we are teaching honesty, we're teaching compassion, we're teaching again, not harming one another, not stealing. And yet then on the other hand, you teach something that is immoral, which children know is immoral, and deep down, the community, their parents, they know it's immoral, but we're teaching and exposing our children to this every day in our classroom. I remember, and I'll just be candid about it. I go to pick up my child from school, and one of her teachers, a guy with a big beard, right, is wearing a dress. You know what I mean? And that's like any dress. He's wearing the dress over some pants, like it's like a little tutu type of thing. And I'm just like, again, this from a trauma issue. That again, this is what our children are being exposed to, and nobody, we're just accepting it. They're saying it's okay. And I don't believe that. I don't think that there's again a way that we can disconnect what is happening in terms of our children's conduct and what they see, with respect to how they're being exposed. And I think perhaps again from the very top that this is happening, and I've heard even in Montgomery County, some leaders expressing reservations about what is happening in terms of this value system, and it's being contradictory to the values that a lot of our parents have. Doc, can you speak to that, and how are you guys
Well, just real quick, Todd, I think number one, we teach all of our students to know their own biases, um, um, but also be respectful and tolerant of everyone. Now, if you if you find yourself in a situation that's um, different than your own set of values, then I think you need to um, um, divorce yourself away from that particular situation, so that you're in a situation where your values are respected and or are uh, uh, reinforced with the place in which you take your child. Um, for me, I think you have there's enough room and enough opportunity there for everybody, um, no matter how they were brought up, or how they like to present themselves, that they have a place in public education. But that does not necessarily mean that it's in the same place as me, right? And so there are, I think, options and or opportunities enough if we do things right, using the system that is afforded to us, to make sure that our children are brought up in a system that is congruent with our own values. But you'll see that there are a lot of situations now that are different than when I came up, like I said, in Chicago, or that you came up in Detroit. And some of those things are much more positive. Um, Having friends and a teacher that was Muslim, I can tell you that things are trending in a direction that's much more uh, appropriate for our children to view and to be a part of. But with that have come some other things, some other alternative lifestyles that people might not necessarily be as uh, okay with, but that we need both of those opportunities in our community, in our schools, for students to really learn what America is all about, and who all they may come in contact with. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that when you get home that you don't have a long conversation about how that is different from your own values, and making sure that kids, but all of that is part of parenting, right? All of that is part of us being the best role models we can be, because ultimately students are going to make, and children are going to make their own choices. But if you spread it out on the table and make sure that they understand your point of view, I think then they can make the better choices and follow your lead. And I see Christine
Sorry
had
about that.
another question. That's all right.
We were just joined by the county executive from Montgomery County, Mark Elleridge. Mark is a community activist oriented leader who has been criticized. One reason why he was criticized, and I want to ask him to speak to this, is because he saw a need to restructure the relationship between police in our schools, and how we're disciplining our children using police. And he took flack for this. I was talking to one police officer, just a couple days ago, and he was saying, I don't like this Mark Elleridge because he took us out of the schools, and we used to have officers in the schools, and now we can't even go into the schools, and then we have to wait for them, and then when we call, the principals don't want us to arrest the students. And I was like, looking at I was like, if that was what he, did, then I support that, because I am definitely not, for arresting students, I would have been arrested, as we talked about, in terms of the fights that I used to get into, because of the bullying that was happening to me. I would have been arrested multiple times, under that type of paradigm. But you literally have, police officers and others thinking that that is the right thing to do, you know, and you know, and again, Dr. Walter, you provided a good background of why some of these children are acting out, but yet we do need more discipline, and I'm a big believer in that. But I had at our school, we didn't have a student school resource officer as a police. We had a security personnel, a person who was at our door, you know, greeting us as we came in, not in dressed in a police uniform. I don't know if she was a former police officer or not, but she was definitely somebody who was, you know, a disciplinarian. You know what I mean? And we knew not to cross her. You know, but she didn't have to have a gun in order for her to demand respect. But yet it seems that these police officers think that they are the only thing that is, you know, going to save our youth. And Mark, I so personally, Mark, I just want to say I salute you for that bold step that you take. And I disagree with people who criticize you and say that you need to be replaced because that I think, in fact, in anything, we need to elevate you because you were so bold to do that. But you know, what can you speak to in terms of, you know, your thoughts about what more can be done? We've been having this whole 2-hour conversation on what new things can be done to save our young people. What are you committed to doing? We talked about the need to increase funding for after-school program, for summer program, because there's nothing, you know, for young people to do. We talked about the need to invest more in terms of parenting, you know, training parents side by side with the youth. We talked about more monies that need to be invested in counselors. You can't have a 1 to 250 or 1 to 1,000 ratio in our schools. Mark, you know, are you committed to doing in the next 4 years?
These are the things that really interest me. So I've well, this year we put in enough money to have 2 mental health workers per school, and then the school system wasn't able to hire the people, so we wound up, and we had worked out a really good compromise with the principal, who actually was on the same page. She was under enormous pressure to put police in schools, but I said you can't have them patrolling the halls, and you can't have them enforcing school discipline. She says I don't want them to patrol the halls, and I don't want them to enforce school discipline. And so if it makes people better to know that somebody's in a room, yeah, they're in a room, but they're not doing what they were doing before. 97% of the calls the police initiated in the school were initiated by principals. They weren't using their own security. Or Frank, I'm like you. I didn't have any police in my school when I was growing up, and it's not like there weren't ever any fights. You know, somehow people managed to manage it, and they just kind of abdicated all responsibility. So I will say, you know, they're retraining their security staff. The security staff goes back to playing a more prominent role in this, and police only get called if there's shooting or something violent, an assault or something. But none of this, you know, you won't listen to me crap, and putting them in a principal's office and calling the police up. So that's gone. There's a lot of other stuff we need to do. I realized, you know, everybody talks about mental health. It's a kid problem, but it's also more than a kid problem. It's young adults. It's adults in their 20s who, you know, it's amazing to me how many people are struggling with rent who you would think would never be struggling with rent. And then there are the older folks who are really feeling the effects of isolation, kind of like our kids did too. So I want to reopen a system of mental health clinics. Montgomery County used to have mental health clinics. They were community clinics. You could walk in, you could set up appointments. They would see you. They might see your whole family, which I thought was a really important thing. So we're getting pricing on what it's going to take to open clinics around the county. And I know a lot of kids, even in high school, they're not going to go to the counselor or go into the counselor's office with a bunch of students around and bring attention to themselves. So I've got to put into place another system that I think can actually provide support. So that's important to me. I think the schools have got to, once and for all, decide that everybody gets educated. We can't have a system where kids who are going to college are ready to go to college, and the kids who aren't going to college aren't ready for anything. We don't train them. We don't spend a lot of time talking about their futures. We don't try to get the kids early on and say, look, there are lots of things you can be when you grow up. Introduce them to jobs, you know, that they're not going to normally see. When I was growing up, I knew adults who did different things. I live in the neighborhood I taught in. I taught elementary school for 17 years. And if you lived in the apartments there, you didn't see people who were professional. You didn't know about other things that people did. Weren't talking to engineers, electricians, and plumbers. You were talking to people who are basically day laborers working in restaurants. You don't have the picture of what's possible in the world. And the school system is responsible for, I think, giving kids a sense of hope and creating in them a sense of possibility. They educate them like it's serious. This idea that we send kids out of high school unable to read or do functional math is really a problem, and it's not okay. And you can't keep continuing to do, like you said, things that don't work anymore. If it doesn't work, you got to change. So we're putting a lot of effort into that. We've got a new workforce development program. When I was on the council last year, I was there 4 years ago. The old director came to us after being criticized for not providing job support in the East County, which is the heaviest minority area in the county. Came in front of a meeting of the council and told us about the 5 jobs they found for people. And I'm like, 5 jobs? Seriously? For all the millions you get? 5 jobs for people in need over here? So we restructured that whole workforce in Montgomery, brought a new director. We're now getting training out to hundreds of people. And the goal is not to train people where they are, but to train people up to get higher skilled jobs so that they're not stuck at the bottom of minimum wage. I was the author of both minimum wage bills in Montgomery County, the one that took us to $11.50 and the one that took us to $15. And when I come back, we're going to start talking about moving toward a living wage, because kids have to have a son. There's nothing more depressing than talking to a room of 10-year-olds and talking about the future and try to say, well, these are things you can do. The kids tell you we're not going to live to be 25. I never thought I'd hear that from a 10-year-old, let alone from a room full of 10-year-olds who are reinforcing why they didn't think. Because if you're 10 years old and you don't think you're going to live to be 25, we have seriously neglected you and left you in a mental state that you don't believe there's hope for your life, and the only way your life is going to spin is out of control. I was just kind of stunned by that. And it's informed a lot of what I try to do at the council. What I tried to do at the council, and what I'm trying to do as county executive, is make sure kids, don't look at their futures that way. I grew up with punk music in the 80s, and there was a chant from one of the Sex Pistols songs, was "No future, no future." And I remember watching videos of kids in England, and just in a room, just raising their fists and chanting "No future, no future." And I felt like, as in my classroom, I was reminded of this in kids who didn't see a future. So I feel like we've got a real obligation to show kids that there is a future and help make them believe that their future is possible. We've got to do work with parents so that parents think the future is possible for kids. I've had parents when I was teaching who told me not to talk to their kid about going to college because we're never going to be able to send them there. They don't realize that we've got programs and scholarships, and it's not a door that's closed. So I think we got a lot of work to do. And I've always been committed to doing this. I support rent stabilization so that all these families don't wind up getting displaced during these major rent increases we're about to face. I get the complexity of the community. I've been pushing tenant ownership with my nonprofit community, trying to convince them to stop just doing rental housing and start giving people a chance to own their own buildings so they can actually build equity and think about something positive, as opposed to knowing if you rent for 30 years, you leave with nothing and you got nothing to leave your kids. So I try to take a holistic approach to this.
Well, I want to just say how grateful we are that you joined us. But I think I want to just ask if you would be willing to commit, as we've asked the other candidates who were on, to commit to increasing the resources, particularly for programs like ours. And not specifically like programs, but ours. We are trying to send 150 young people to camp this summer, Mark. And the camp costs a total of $60,000, $400 per student. And a lot of our students don't have, their parents are struggling to meet it, but we just have our expenses we have to cover. We'd like to see if you in your office will work with us to sponsor, and send at least, it'd be great if you guys could send 50 students to camp, but no less than we'd like to send, if you guys can sponsor at least 25, that would be great. But this is what we need. And we need for more resources to be dedicated to programs like ours. We have programs that work, like, Dr. Walter said, that these programs have data, that shows that if resources are put in there, students are engaged, and while they're engaged, they're not causing harm to themselves or others. Mark, can we get that commitment from you?
I can't make it by myself. This is all this has to go as an appropriation through the council, because we don't.
Well, we hope that maybe there might be some monies left in your own discretionary budget, that you might be able to at least send a few students, to camp, but or at least let's see if we can commit to talking about it further after.
Let's talk about it. I don't have a true discretionary budget. Everything, I have no slush funds, so to speak. Okay. So everything, any expenditure has to be authorized by the council. They've got one more meeting left before they go on August recess.
Okay.
Just for future reference, they start putting together and asking for grant requests by December of this year, November and December.
Okay.
And grant requests go in and they go through a committee, and then they come. Well, actually, they go through a committee. We tried to depoliticize it so that politicians weren't playing with the grant money. But that's where you would normally get in this cycle. But at least write me something and let me know the details and the costs, and I'll see if there's anything we can put out there.
Okay, excellent. Well, Lisa left one question. I think this is a good question to end us off with, and I'll get both of you guys' statements on it. And again, I really appreciate this amazing dialogue. It was so timely. And it talked about how growing up in the 70s and the 80s, and I think even to some extent the 90s, the children were raised by the community. Children were, we saw somebody in our neighborhood saw one of us doing something, they would, take action and then report us to our parents. We don't have that type of community these days. And the question is, how do we go back? How do we return to that type of community where we have the trust in one another, that, we can, help and support the children that we see, having problems on our streets, and then be connected with their parents, so then their parents can reinforce it. What do we need to do in order to go back to that?
That's the $64 million question. If we could do that, we'd win all the elections. And if we could organize at that level. But I agree with you. One thing I've tried to do, because I believe in rent stabilization, we saw this in Tacoma Park that actually has it. It slowed down the student mobility. In other words, families weren't moving as often. And so families tended to stay in Tacoma Park because the rents weren't going up dramatically. So if you started with your kid in first grade here, kindergarten here, there's a good chance you were going to go all the way through the system, because you weren't going to be forced to move because of rising rents. This is one reason I really believe in rent stabilization. Is if the moment people aren't moving all the time, you do a couple things. One is you lower the stress on the kids, because kids hear all these fights about money, and any insecurity their parents have winds up getting bounced onto the kids. So it's important to try to stabilize that. But if we could actually stabilize rents, there's a good chance that those families stay longer. If they stay longer, they look at the community different. It's, I've heard people say, why am I going to do anything? I'm going to be leaving next year. Whereas the people who know they're going to be there long term, same incomes, their attitude is more like, I live in this community, I'm going to be here, I'm going to get engaged because I don't like what I see. So I think part of it, we've got to stabilize housing so that people actually have a chance to root themselves in the community. I grew up in D.C., and the families that moved in when the city integrated, a lot of them stayed around a long time. They didn't come into the neighborhood and then leave a little bit later. In my neighborhood, these were very low, they were affordable, pretty low-priced housing. People were able to get in if they are federal workers. So I think that's a concrete thing that we've got to work at. Ownership is the same thing. Once people own things, they're going to tell you, I'm a taxpayer, you better take care of me because I vote and I'm a taxpayer. I can think of a lot of different ways like that would help strengthen the kind of community you want. And then, I think we need to not be shy about doing community organizing. I mean, people get very nervous. When I was on the Highland Park Council, I was there 19 years. It took me 12 years to get the council to agree to hire a community organizer, which was amazing. And I'm like, this is important. People need to know where they can go get services. They need to know how to connect into the city. And I would like to. We put some money in tenant organizing. I'd like to expand the money in tenant organizing because it gives tenants a voice about issues that that affect them. And I think anytime you give them a voice, you're making progress.
Well, I as a parent organizer, I would say that we also need to double down our investment in in parent organizing as well. Maybe invest more money in our PTAs and those organizations that are supporting our schools. And I do think that there's a gap between parents who are raising their children who opt to send them to private school versus those who send them to public schools.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think there needs to be. There doesn't need to be a connection. We're all parents. We're all trying to raise our children the best way we can, and we need to all be supported. But and I think that recent Supreme Court legislation, Supreme Court rulings, provide some more leeway for such programs. But Mark, we are really glad that you joined, because a lot of people that there's some misinformation out there. There's a lot of information out there that suggests that you've not done a good job, that you've that the reason why we're having problems in our schools and problems on our streets is because of mistakes that you've made, and yet the people who are funding this misinformation, if you will, are people who have almost a total servitude to the business interests. Yep. Who don't give a flying hoot as they used to say, about people, only profits, and who will make problems that are currently we're struggling with even worse. So do you want to give some commentary as we conclude on that?
Look, I mean, I'm getting.
We can't see you, Mark. I don't know.
Oh, what happened? Let me try to get it back. Hold on. Can you see me?
Yep, you're back now. Okay.
So there's multiple PACs out there. One PAC started out as Progressives for Progress. They're all funded by developers. This weekend, there's a PAC out there about affordable housing. They just got $500,000 from, I think, 5 developers total. 5 people. One of them put in $250,000. They hate that I support rent stabilization. They hate that I want to increase the amount of affordable units. So they have the balls to call themselves, it's the Affordable Housing PAC, when it's actually, let's not build affordable housing that they're interested in. They did this to me last time. I got outspent. Blair spent $10 million last time. His PAC spent almost $10 million. I beat him by 77 votes. I had about $1 million I raised from public financing. This year, I'm at $1 million for public financing, and I'm going to have to battle another $20 million again. It's unbelievable. And they have the ability just to bombard the airwaves with whatever story they want to tell, and they're not liable for telling the truth. Unlike any other advertising, which you could take off the air if it wasn't truthful, the FCC regulations say you can lie if it's politics. That is amazing. Unbelievable. So this election is really important. I think, we can win. We've been ahead throughout the polling season. We're probably ahead now. But somebody told me they saw 6 ads of his this morning on 1.5 hour TV show. So I know what I'm up against. In fact, right now I was at a mobilization where 100 people got together and they're going out on the street and start knocking doors in the county. So we've got a lot of people helping us.
Well, that as a son of a former elected official and someone who at least tried to follow in his footsteps, I can tell you that the number one way of combating money is people power. And you
Yep.
get those people on the doorsteps knocking and talking. You get, people calling. You get people texting. You get people posting on social media. You can overcome any amount of money. And that's clear that's what's going on. Even on YouTube, almost every commercial that I get in this,
family. Thank you, Debbie.
I get almost every commercial we get, is talking about your opponent. So it's great to hear you firsthand, so people can, say, "Oh, we didn't hear a commercial. We heard from Mark Ehrlich himself." And we know now that you're a former educator. We know, you spent almost 2 decades on the city council before you went to the county council, and we know, some of the reasoning behind your decisions, for example, to try to eliminate, police officers being disciplinarians in our schools and try to replace them with counselors or other, people who are not going to be, taking our children to jail as a first way of disciplining. So we want to say to Dr. Walter, we salute you for taking the time there from Virginia State University. And we salute our president, Dr. Makola Abdullah, for sending you, and Dr. Robert Corley on his team. And we look forward to, hopefully getting some of those excellent programs that you have outlined and some of the excellent recommendations. We appreciate all of the speakers from, Bernice North to Lorianne Sales to Brandy, from Brandy Brooks, to County Executive Mark Ehrlich for joining us today. We have as I said before, STEM4US has a summer program that we're hosting from the 8th through the 20th. It's going to be a cyber ed focused program, and we really want to encourage as many parents to sign their children up as possible. And we want to encourage our elected officials, like our county executive and others, to invest in it so we can hopefully get children who cannot afford the $400 tuition to check the program out. We're going to leave you now with a little preview of that program, and we look forward to again working with you, Dr. Walter, and you, Mark Ehrlich, in the days to come. Thank you so very much. And again, if you like the program, don't hesitate to like it, share it, and subscribe to our channel. And we look forward to remaining engaged in upcoming days. So stand by for a preview of the STEM4US Cyber Camp. And again, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Dr. Walters.
It has already been a violent year in the DMV. Just this weekend, 4 people, including the teenager we just mentioned, were killed in separate shootings in Washington.
Now, one Metro nonprofit wants to help reduce crime numbers across the area. Nicole D'Antonio joins us live from Tyson's Corner with the details on this program. Nicole, good morning.
Hey there, good morning to you. And of course, where we're standing right now, Tyson's Mall, is where 3 people were injured trying to escape a shooting just 10 days ago. And this is part of an overall concerning trend all across the DMV, and a big reason that the founder of one local nonprofit wants to take steps to help this summer. For the 5th consecutive year, we know that homicides have increased here in the Washington, D.C. area. Of course, we're only 6 months into this new year, and D.C. has reported more than 100 homicides so far in 2022. So just for perspective on this, that's a 21% increase from the same time last year. And last weekend, police believe a decades-old gang war in D.C. led to the shots being fired right here at Tyson's Mall. On the heels of all that violence, the nonprofit STEM4US launched a summer event to help steer kids away from the violence. It's called the Hackathon, teaching hundreds of middle and high school students about cybersecurity. Now, we spoke with the founder who tells us the program has two goals: to train more young professionals in STEM fields, but also to provide engaging activities for kids to enroll in during the summer months.
We can get young people directly in the pipeline of actually getting training and actually finding things to do, particularly over the summertime. Then they can change not only their lives, but the lives of their families. And that's what we're focusing on.
So coming up on July 14th, they're actually hosting this big conversation between parents, educators, to talk about ways to expand access to summer camp. Again, during these summer months, we have all the information on our website, WSA9.com. Guys, we'll send things back inside to you. So.
Again, that was a preview on our camp. You can go to STEM4US.org and we'll put that into the chat so you can find out more information about the summer camp and enroll your student there. And if you are either an educator, or if you are a business leader or a parent, or just someone who's concerned and you want to support this program and send some students to camp, we'll make sure that you have a link that will allow you to do so, because we need your support. Our students, many of them, don't have anything to do this summer, and all they're looking for is an opportunity to basically work and have a chance to do something more constructive if they are given an opportunity to do so. And so we want to meet that call. We want parents who are calling on leaders for things that they can do constructively for their children. We want to help and provide that type of constructive opportunity for them by giving them this camp. And and we're a big believer that parents need to invest something. And so even if you can invest 90% of what it costs and have the parent invest the other, so if the camp costs $400, you can invest $360, and then we require the parent to invest the other 40. That's even great, but do something if you can. And again, we're going to put that link into the chat for those of you who want to invest something. You will have an opportunity to choose what amount you want to invest for our youth. And so that link is going into the chat right now. You'll see that on the side of the window. Go ahead and click on that. And if you, again, have any questions that you want to ask about, again, what we're doing, don't hesitate to reach out to us at Talib@STEM4US.org. And I can also put that in the chat as well. So again, this has been Talib Kareem, Executive Director with STEM4US. We're here to help engage our young people, to train them in some cyber skills, data technology, cybersecurity, drone technology, web development, mobile phone development, gaming technology, and then place them in these jobs, mentor them while they're in the jobs, and then hopefully bring them out to become mentors themselves and repeat this cycle. And through doing so, we hope to be able to save and engage hundreds, if not thousands, of our young people from harming themselves and others around us. So that's all we have for today. Stay tuned for more programming coming up. We have another program happening on the 26th of this month in Memphis, Tennessee, at the National Civil Rights Museum during the National Bar Association's convention. we have a conference, the Dr. Talib Kareem Muhammad Symposium on Law and Education, which we're going to be dealing with how civil rights litigation that changed Memphis's history can be used, and the lessons from that litigation can be used to engage our youth today. So we look forward to you joining us there if you're in Memphis, and if not, checking us out on YouTube. And so that is it for tonight or this morning, and we look forward to engaging with you soon. Don't hesitate to like this channel, share it, and subscribe. Until then, this is Talib Kareem for STEM4US. Have a wonderful day or evening.